What do you think, and how does this connect in your mind to like politics and some of that?
So I think it makes people more susceptible to the person that kind of promises the instant fix, especially for the many people who aren't really well informed politically. The vast majority of people are not well informed politically, and they never have been, and that's probably a little too much to ask, but I think your commentary about people being high, that's kind of interesting. I've certainly noticed that. But even if they're not just getting high all the time, they're definitely just checking out, right? Like mentally and emotionally checking out.
Right.
So more than ever,
Actually, using drugs might be a more extreme version of that, but the overall idea of people checking out more in whatever
yeah.
way, yeah, it seems to
Oh,
be going
totally.
up. Yeah, keep
I,
going.
I've met people so high, when I'm trying to get something at a store that I've had to do their job for them. So I totally know what you're talking about. But yeah, that checking out and just being detached, that's kind of really, really evident. And when people are checked out and detached, like they're detached from their society, so they don't feel as much of a pull to like the long term. Like I'm a mom, and I'm 60 years old, and I mean, basically at this point, and especially since I grew up at a different time than a lot of people were talking about, I think about, well, what do I need to do to like make sure that my kid and his kids, have a decent world, right? And so, like to a certain extent, I do some things that I would rather not do, and I have that kind of story in my head. But I think the more detached you are and the more numbed you are and the more isolated you are, because like we haven't really talked about this, but our economy and our culture is isolating too. It kind of thrives on isolation. The less you can connect your story to other people's and kind of say, well, despite the fact that I may be stuck, but I'm helping out these people, or I'm going to maybe make it better. This is the immigrant story to a certain extent, right? I'm going to make it better for my kids who won't have to do this. We can't do that, right? If we're kind of like socially isolated from friends, family, or maybe we don't have very many friends or family, and the economy is literally kind of like loves people who are isolated, right? So it doesn't do anything to encourage. It wants us to get all of our gratification and soothing and sense of safety and belonging from it. So what does that do? Well, politically, it makes people really susceptible to being lied to, right? Because they're not paying attention. They know that they're unhappy, and somebody comes along, and if you don't know how economics really works, or if you don't understand the American political system, and they say, I can fix something in 2 weeks, right? Or I can make peace happen, or you will have economic prosperity. It's just these people that are in the way. And I mean, that sounds a lot like the Trump administration, but I dare say the Democrats have used similar rhetoric in the past. Um, Maybe not quite as extreme, but still like promising things that they can't deliver on, kind of this rosy scenario. If you don't know, how things work, you're really hurting, you might really want to believe that. And you're also going to be angry. And I feel like American politics today feeds on people's anger in a serious way on both sides. If you really, it's about not wanting to be or not liking these people, right? It's not about like who we are or what we could become. It's about like stopping these people, right? Because they're like very evil, and they're the ones that are actually stopping you from having that nice job and having job security and maybe having a family and all these different things, which is not true. Like it's not particular people or a group of people who are actively trying to stop anybody from having these things. It's the system that we live in, but it's very hard to intellect, the system to actually figure that out. It's a lot easier to think it's these people, whether it's immigrants or women or Republicans or Democrats or Christians or atheists, whatever, Muslims, whatever it is. It's a lot easier to think that they are standing in your way rather than the system itself is just kind of messed up and it needs human regulation. And we haven't really been doing that for a long time.
Yeah, this makes total sense. I mean, in my mind, it's often. I mean, who do snake oil salesmen sell to? They sell to people in need. It's often the
Mhm.
desperate, in that case, maybe the people who are sick, who are much more likely to want who to be appealing to find a snake oil salesman appealing. And it seems like as desperation goes up, it becomes easier to kind of take advantage of it by politicians, and it becomes easy to say. It seems like anger can be an answer to isolation. It can be a way to feel like you're a part of something, to lash out to some group of people, even if that group is just basically presented as a type of scapegoat, as a it's their fault.
Right. Yeah, because now you feel like you're a part of a group anyway, but you have a sort of common cause and it's against these other people. And you know that that's one major source of human identity, right? Is that we're not them, you know. Um, but at this point, there's no ethnic or cultural reason for that, right? Like we don't have those kind of strong ties anymore. We're kind of trying to invent them. Different people are trying to invent them, but those strong identifications, cultural identifications, I think have been eroded seriously and are a thing of the past in a lot of countries, and not in all, obviously, but certainly in a country like ours, I think. And so, without those, we try to sort of reinvent them, I think, in our politics. But it doesn't work because politics can't give you that kind of sense of belonging and meaning. It's ultimately unsatisfying because it is snake oil. They're selling you something that's not real and it never fixes your problem. Right? Like one of the things that I ask people when they're from the right and they're like angry at Democrats, I say, so, we've had Republican administrations quite a bit in the past, like 30 years or so. And has there ever been a time when your taxes went down as a middle class person for real? Did they ever go down? Do you feel like you ever really like saved tons of tax money? And they can't really think of a time, right? Because you're overall under both parties, generally speaking, our taxes have gone up. And collectively anyway, all of them combined, and yet we're getting less for them because the system is becoming more and more dysfunctional. So they tend to kind of find that hard to argue with, right? But they're being told that this party is the one that wants to tax the heck out of you and it wants to turn us into whatever, and we won't. We'll do the opposite, but they never do. So if people can, but it's too much to ask. This is what I've come to realize, is that I think that the go-to thing that people say if they can see this dynamic is, well, we just need to inform people better. But that doesn't work, obviously, right? That just obviously doesn't work. We want to believe that giving them more information will work and giving them facts will work. But that isn't why they started down this road to begin with. It's highly emotional and it's a belief system. Politics has become like religion, and so to get people out of that religiosity, you have to try to find some other way to provide meaning and purpose. And one of the things I do in my book is I take apart like American religious dynamics, because I don't think American Christianity is able to fill the void. And that's part of our problem too. It's rather succumbed to the same dynamics. And you could say the same thing of like in the Islamic world of militant Islam, right? The Islamic extremism. They, to the extent that religion becomes political extremism, it has abandoned its ability to give people a sense of higher meaning and purpose. So, yeah, so then if you got a choice between just hyper politics and hyper religion, political religion, I'll just go for hyper politics. But I would like to find some way around both of them.
Yeah, it seems like both in their extreme can look very similar, and in some cases interconnect because some hyper religious people are hyper political, and some hyper political people become hyper religious. Yeah, what do you think is what do you think we can do? Like you hinted at two different sets of things. One around kind of rethinking how to find purpose and meaning in our society, and then the other before you were talking about you know like effective regulation or yeah. What do you think? Maybe it's not realistic to be like, and here's the three things we can do to get out of this mess. But like, what do you think about like what we can do about this?
So I wish that we could make collective political decisions that would help give people more of a sense of security so that they could kind of come down from this level of anxiety. But I don't think we can do that here. I
Mm-hmm.
do think in a lot of other countries in the world that is actually happening. Like in a lot of the European countries, you do see a larger social safety net. And they do have extremist parties, but they have a parliamentary system or, a system that allows for a certain amount of political splintering. And we don't have that. We've got a two-party system that makes it harder, to deal with when it takes over our political parties. But I don't think, at least in the United States right now, that politics can solve this problem.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, politics is the only thing that can solve this problem.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, as far as what we can do sub political level, right? And I see this, in my own activity and the people that I work with in Kansas City. You see it in people who are trying their best to form some kind of community. I think that those types of efforts can help some people live a more meaningful life and a life that feels like they belong a little bit more, and that's good. And we can talk more about those things if you want. But I just think America right now is in such a um, it's just in a downward spiral where I just can't imagine our political system stepping back from these core commitments to liberalism, for instance. Just the two parties, even though the Trump administration kind of gives a good, it's sort of fakes being illiberal, but ultimately it's for the free market. It's for, even with the tariffs, it's for basically those tariffs are there to like rejigger the economy to the benefit of the US, but not really to the benefit of the workers. So, I just don't see any stomach on either side of our political divide for an increase in true democratic socialism, which would be things like, let's build a good transportation system. Let's have like absolutely secure medical care for everybody. Let's make sure that nobody's homeless, maybe have a universal basic income. These things would be like the bare minimum that it would take to keep capitalism going in the long run. Believe it, talk about this like capitalism for these things, right? But the truth is that to have capitalism continue, people have to be relatively satisfied. And at this point, that would be the only way to do it. And we don't have the gut muscle. So we're going to get more like dissatisfaction. And I think our politics are going to erode to be kind of sub democratic. We're not going to, we already, I mean, we haven't been like, well, it would be wrong to say we're a democracy to begin with. We're a liberal democracy. But, we're seeing real strains on our system where people aren't able to feel like their vote really matters. The outcome is bad regardless of how they vote. And I don't know any way out of this, honestly, until a crisis point hits, which I don't advocate for, because I think when countries hit a crisis point, it's a very scary time, and we might be about there. I mean, it's a scary time to be alive right now. And because there are revolutionary forces kind of beneath all of this, right? But I guess I'm just saying I don't think we're going to solve the problem through normal political means in this country. And that is a frightening prospect. So it's why some people are kind of trying to figure out how they can more or less kind of escape from the liberal system or withdraw to a certain extent and cooperate with each other. And I have some experience on that score that I can offer, but it depends on where you want to go, I guess.
Why don't you offer some of that, and then I do want to hear some about some of the stuff that sorry, I do want to talk about some of the stuff that you're doing as well, in terms of the kind of the different groups that you have founded too.
Sure, yeah. Well, I can sort of talk about both because they're pretty intertwined. So in my book, I deal with churches because part of the angle of this book is a Christian angle. So, and I ask the question, like, not only what's wrong with American churches, but what could be right with them. The reason for the focus on churches is because when you think about it, in America, Christianity is still pretty big. It's still the number one religion. And if you look at, any town, there's a church every 4 blocks practically, right? So there's all these buildings everywhere, and there's this fairly high level of organization relative to a lot of other, local organizations. Usually a pastor, and then you've got like a committee, and you've got layers of authority, and you've got a budget and all this stuff, right? So that's more organization than a lot of local political parties have. So if you look at it that way, this is a huge resource. In the American Civil Rights Movement, it was used to help propel the civil rights movement and organize it. It was a locus of organization. So it could be that, but it's absolutely not for the most part. The thin community that people get in these churches it's very thin indeed, right? Like you go maybe once in a while, or maybe you go every Sunday and you see people, you shake hands, and then you go home. Or if you're really dedicated, you go to a study group and talk for an hour, and then you go home. So there's no cooperation to speak of helping each other. They might do charitable outreach to others, but they don't ever think about what can we do to build a community to where we're actually helping each other out with things that we would otherwise pay for, and therefore kind of helping our people de-link so much from this consumerist economy and from these huge, economic anxieties that they have, by saying, we'll actually have each other's back. That's where they don't go, hardly ever. And that makes me mad, because that is early Christianity did do that.
Mm-hmm.
That is a part of the Christian legacy, and people have forgotten that. So I do discuss that. And then I look at the Catholic worker movement, and I'm a part of that. That's it's got Catholic in the title, but it's definitely an ecumenical movement, and it includes a lot of people who aren't Christians, who aren't anything in particular. It is a movement that started in the Great Depression with Dorothy Day and Peter Moore. So many people have heard of Dorothy Day. She was an activist at the time, kind of a leftist activist in the 30s, very anti-war, even refused to endorse World War II, even though it was against the Nazis, because she was thoroughly anti-war. So people know about her, but they don't know so much about Peter Moore. He had this idea of more or less agricultural communes or farming communes, where people could retreat from the city where they were unemployed during the Depression. And at that time, subsistence farming was still very much a thing that people understood and knew how to do, or at least many of them did. And they would go and they would just kind of take care of each other. And this would be a retreat from the hardships of homelessness in the city. So they did both. They did houses of hospitality in the city to help people who were homeless to get food and clothing and such. And they did these farming communes as well. The farming communes didn't work out too well. They require a level of cooperation that even then people were not really capable of doing. They'd already been too fractured by industrial capitalism to like find it easy to work together and to do this kind of cooperation. The houses of hospitality were more of a success, and there are lots of houses of hospitality to this day, especially in major cities around the world. And they do take in some people. They aren't just soup kitchens. They form little communities of different types of people, and they work together to help other people. In the farming communes, I wouldn't call them communes anymore, but there's definitely like Catholic worker farms. And the ideal still is that you will take in people who can work together and farm together and, help feed each other and house each other and kind of pool their resources, right? I mean, one way to deal with the economy and the insecurity we have, frankly, is to pool your resources and make genuine friends, honestly. But we hardly know how to do it, right? Like knowing how to make a genuine, lasting, committed friendship is hard. And I would say it's just as hard as like getting married and having that last, right? Maybe even harder. Because you don't have the law like standing over you or the threat of losing half of your resources when you get divorced. So like this is a huge challenge, and in our experience, we have a Catholic worker farm in Kansas City that I'm a part of, or at least I support. I don't live there right now because I have a job in Manhattan. And, maybe someday I'll be closer to there. But I go there at least once a month. I work. I financially support some of the things we've helped build up a guest house, and we have people who live there full time as well as people who come in as we call them worker scholars. But it's hard. It's hard because of this. The interpersonal relations are the hardest part. Lots of times when you have somebody new, I mean, it's hard enough to work together if you've known people for a long time, and that is challenging. But if you have somebody new who kind of idealizes this community and they're like, yeah, I want to work together. I want to homestead. I want to, do more of this kind of work and feed myself more, not rely so much on a paycheck. Getting down to it is like, I would say the failure rate is probably 70% at least, right? Like just whether it's the physical work that's a problem or like living with other people, which I think is way more of a problem. It's living with other people is like extremely hard as it turns out. And not unreasonably so, right? And people don't necessarily get like, oh, I might have to modify my behavior to get along and be around other people. And how do you like shape a community, right? So it's very, very, it's like, it's not impossible. I think we're doing it, but it's like really pretty hard. On the other hand, it's very meaningful. So, but would I say that this is a solution for our society's problems? No, it's not. It's not. It might be sort of an inspiration for people in whatever walk of life they're in to stop just buying everything and look around and see if they can forge relationships with other people to fill some of those gaps, like maybe their neighbors or their family members, instead of arguing with your family, maybe like see what they can do for you and what you can do for them. But like it's extremely difficult for people in our society to do those things. We want to feel like we're completely independent, right? And that anything short of that is shameful. Well, already our culture sets us up for zero cooperation, right? Which is why I say capitalism feeds on that, right? It wants to make you feel ashamed if you need somebody else. So that's really perverse, So it could serve as as kind of like an inspiration, and I think it should for people in whatever walk of life they're in, to look around and ask, can I cooperate with somebody else? Can I find some meaning outside of the economy, right? Can I, frankly, save some money by not reinventing the wheel? Because I don't want to feel the shame of asking somebody for help.
Mm.
Yeah.
This makes total sense. I mean, I could see. So first of all, this reminds me. I mean, many years ago, when I was fresh out of college, I was a part of a Catholic worker movement for. And now, ironically, I joined it for a couple months. And this was in Chicago, and then it actually fell apart because of
Uh,
like
yeah.
leasing issues and many there was some in the community wanted to stay in the city, but many wanted to go to the kind of the there was a related rural, like you were kind of talking about these two different sides of that movement. So many of them, when the lease expired, just went to the rural area, and the community kind of just splintered from there. But
Mm-hmm.
that aside, I do like I think Dorothy Day is. I mean, she's the most famous person for this, but a very clear inspiration. Like, I would recommend anyone read her autobiography.
Yeah. The
Uh,
long loneliness. All right.
that one. Yeah, I couldn't remember
Yeah.
the title. But yeah, it seems like this is kind of very much in the like kind of building alternate community. I mean, you were talking about the early church, which at least before Constantine seemed to have a very different relationship with the powers that in their society, particularly the Roman society, than many churches do now in the United States. And I've seen
Mm-hmm.
many churches. I mean, it's like U.S. Christianity is very broad. So like but I've seen many churches that seem to be very much a part of the system, whether that's propagating things politically, but also very much a part of this kind of consumption capitalist mindset in many cases in ways that they're not fully aware of, and kind of like surviving and building within that, as opposed to. But I think, like you said, I think there's a lot of promise, like on a practical level. I think there a lot of promise to building community. I think the U.S. Church has a major could play a major role in that if it kind of it's a bit of a broad because there's many different churches, but like if a community kind of got itself together and figured out how to do that in a compelling and effective way.